You're now listening to the Engage the Rockies podcast, your go-to podcast for local and state issues concerning Colorado.
Hello, Colorado. This is the Engage the Rockies podcast. I am your host, Jarvis Caldwell, Executive Director of Engage the Rockies. Today's episode, we're talking the oil and gas industry in Colorado. How important is it to Colorado, whether that's the economy, to taxes, to energy prices? And today's guest, there is no one better to discuss this issue than Mr. Dan Haley. Dan is the president and CEO of the Colorado Oil and Gas Association, also known as COGA. Founded in 1984, COGA's mission is to be the unified political and regulatory voice for the oil and natural gas industry in Colorado, and to support their members through advocacy, partnerships, education, and stakeholder engagement. As president, Dan is responsible for leading the industry in Colorado's legislative, regulatory, and public relations matters. Dan, thanks so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Okay, so for the audience, we're going to start off kind of big picture, maybe for people who just aren't very familiar with the oil and gas industry in Colorado, and maybe don't think about it very much, except I'm sure they think about it when they pay their energy bills and go to the gas pump.
Or when the power goes off, like it did for a lot of people this weekend. Yeah,
that's right. That is right. I'm down in Colorado Springs, so fortunately I didn't have that problem, but I know it's a major issue a little bit north of here. Okay, so the importance of oil and gas industry in Colorado. How much tax revenue does it bring to Colorado, and what are those taxes used for?
Sure. First, if you don't mind, I'd like to just start by letting your listeners know that we're an industry that has been in this state since before statehood. The first well drilled in Colorado was drilled in 1860. So we've been doing this a long time. And along the way, we've gotten really good at it and doing it in ways that can protect the environment, protect our air, protect our water, but also provide the energy that our country and our state and our communities need. So we're an important part of the nation's overall oil and gas picture. The United States is the number one producer of oil and natural gas in the world. When I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, that was an unheard of thought, right? Like there's no way the United States could be the number one producer of oil and natural gas. We were dependent on foreign countries for our energy. That is no longer the case. And Colorado is a large part of that. We're the number 4 producer of crude oil and the number 8 producer of natural gas. So an important part of our national energy picture is happening here in Colorado. We're also an important part of the economy. You asked about taxes. A new report came out about 2 weeks ago from the Common Sense Institute, and they looked at 2022, the most recent year numbers were available, and $2 billion in state and local taxes came from this industry. So those are dollars that go back into local governments, back to state government. And I will point out, in the legislature, just a couple of weeks ago, they had to balance the budget. They needed to find money from someplace, and they swept it from our state severance taxes to the tune of about $69 million. And so, again, you've got legislators, you've got activists targeting this industry, yet literally at the same time they're targeting this industry and trying to get rid of us, they're using dollars from this industry to balance the budget, balancing the budget on the backs of the men and women who work in this industry.
Yeah, so I worked in the legislature for 2 years, so I saw that a lot. It was, bash the industry, and then whenever you need a bailout, basically you need to make up.
Handout.
Yeah, you need a handout. Then it's like, well, these people that we knock all the time, we can dig into that. Okay, thank you for that. How many people are employed directly or indirectly here by the oil and gas industry?
So there are several studies out there that look at different factors, anywhere from more than 100,000 to more than 300,000 direct and indirect employees. One thing I will point out is in 2020 and 2021, the number of direct employees dropped when the demand for oil and gas dropped because of the pandemic and economies shutting down across the globe. So I don't have a great number on the exact direct numbers, but I think more than 100,000 direct and indirect is a pretty safe number to go on. We are considered a primary employer in Colorado. So that means for every one job that's created in the oil field or the gas patch, 1.2 jobs are created or supported elsewhere in the economy. When you look at studies that have been done over time, there was a ballot proposal in 2018, Proposition 112, which would have just really decimated our industry. And some of the economic studies done by economists, economic professors, showed that something like, I'm going to kind of be roughly guessing 75% of the jobs lost were outside of our industry
Yeah.
because of the impact that we have
Right.
on the economy. When you have good paying jobs, when you have jobs that average, $100,000 or more, people are buying homes, buying
Right.
cars, buying trucks, going on vacation, doing all these things that help stimulate the economy. So again, this is an important industry that we should not try to run out of the state with bans or bad policies. The other thing I will point out is this is one of the last industries left in this state and in this country where you can have a high school diploma and get a good paying job and buy a house and support your family and do those things that we used to consider to be the American dream. And we need those jobs in this country. We can't continue to export that type of work to other countries.
Absolutely. And kind of to piggyback on what you're saying there is, it's not just, you're not just losing the job of the person running the oil well, right? There's trucks that are delivering gas. There's maintenance workers who are working on the equipment and everything in between. I mean, even down to realtors or something who, who thrive on the people who work in that economy there.
Well, absolutely. And the other thing I would point out is teachers. That was a big part of that initial study. In that Common Sense Institute report, it showed in 2022, $400 some million went into K-12 classrooms in Colorado.
Right.
If this industry is to disappear, that's going to impact education. So what does that mean? Probably means larger class sizes, fewer teachers, things that we don't value in the state. We want good paying jobs for teachers. We want smaller class sizes, all of those things. And so we have to look at that impact. And I think way too often at the State House, you've got legislators who target one particular industry. Sometimes it's us, sometimes it's somebody else. And they don't understand that ripple effect that happens. I'll give you one other quick story. There's a steel mill in Pueblo, hugely important to Pueblo. There's no oil and gas in Pueblo. Yet that steel mill produces seamless steel pipe that gets taken by another Coloradan to northern Colorado. It's sent downhole. It creates oil and natural gas. If this industry is to disappear, it will severely impact that steel mill in Pueblo. Again, no oil and gas in Pueblo, but if oil and gas goes away, Pueblo is impacted by that. So our lawmakers need to understand the ripple effect that their actions have. When you're targeting one industry, it will ripple across the economy.
Absolutely. So what comes to mind for me is my dad was a Kentucky coal miner. And so, this is Appalachia in the mountains. There's not a lot of industry besides coal mining. And I would see it throughout the years, through the decades. And usually, honestly, it depended on what administration federally was in office and who was running the EPA, because there were times where it was doing great, and the coal miners were employed. The truck drivers who were hauling the coal were employed. Even the gas stations who are fueling up the workers on their way to the coal mines. And then when you go down to town, the small businesses or even the large businesses, like there's a mall about 45 minutes away, because when you live in the mountains, that's why they call it a country mile. Right. Even the mall, you would go to the mall and half the stores in the mall would be closed down when coal was being restricted, when coal production, or sometimes it was booming and everybody was doing great. So
100%. I had a very similar experience. I was a journalist for 20 years by trade out of college. And my first job was in Gillette, Wyoming, which is a coal producing Campbell County, Powder River Basin coal producing county. And that was back when the 1990 Clean Air Act was revised, and they were looking for low sulfur coal. So it was a good time to produce coal in Campbell County. But I was able to see just how directly energy impacts a community when you have such a viable, strong industry like that, the positive things it can bring. And when you go after it, you see what happens after it. And it's devastating. And Colorado communities are feeling that now.
Absolutely.
With coal jobs. And we could talk a little bit, I don't want to get ahead, but on when you're looking at banning industry, one of the reasons that this bill we'll talk about was defeated was a representative who's from coal country who's seen what happens when those jobs go away.
Yep, exactly. I can also relate that to, I spent most of my childhood growing up in Cape Canaveral in Florida, where the space industry is. And when NASA retired the space shuttle, and basically NASA didn't go away technically, but I mean, that is a huge part of the economy. And you saw it, and really it didn't get revitalized until SpaceX came around, basically. And that brought the economy back. Let's see. So what would energy prices do if just say tomorrow oil and gas industry went away in Colorado? What would that do to energy prices?
Sure, it's really hard to predict those things, and
Right.
there are people much smarter than me who can do that or try to do that,
Yeah.
economists and analysts, et cetera. But I think the basic supply of or basic law of supply and demand comes into play here as it does anywhere in the economy. If you have less supply and
Right.
demand remains high, that cost is going to go up.
Absolutely.
We've seen that with gasoline prices. You'll
Mhm.
see it with overall energy prices. The other thing that happens is when you have this resource developed here, the transportation costs of getting it to your home are much less than if you're trying to import it in. And so we
Right.
have some of the lower costs. I know that's hard to say because sometimes people are looking at their energy bill saying, what is going on?
Right.
Why is this so high? But we do have some of the lower costs on energy compared to other states across the country. It has gone up in recent years. We were one of the lowest states a few years
Hmm.
back. Now we're something like 13th or 14th.
Yeah.
A group called Wallet Hub will do some surveys on that and
Right.
show you what those numbers look like. So you can assume that the cost of energy will go up. And now is not the
Right.
time to raise prices on people who are already being impacted by record high inflation, which then brought up prices on everything, consumer goods, food, etc. A lot of those food prices are also driven by energy prices, which a lot of people
Yep.
don't understand. The reason we're able to feed the world from the United States is because of technology gains in agriculture, just like the technology gains that we've had in the oil and gas industry. And one of the uses that for natural gas is in hydrogen-based fertilizers, which
Right.
allow you a much greater crop yield and allows us, again, to feed the world from the United States. And so when the price of natural gas goes way up because supply is down for whatever reason, that impacts fertilizer prices, which then impact agriculture, which then impacts your food prices at the grocery store. So again, not unlike that ripple effect, all of these things are all tied in together, and so we need to be cognizant of that when we, meaning the legislature, are passing
Hmm.
rules or regulators are looking at further regulations on the oil and gas industry. So consumer costs is a huge piece of this,
Hmm.
and it is a concern because of the fact that you see people trying to eliminate or reduce this resource. And I would say this too,
Hmm.
when we do that, all we're doing is relying on other countries and other states for our
Right.
energy.
Right.
And that will be more costly, and it's also more costly to the environment to do that.
Yeah.
We are producing this resource here in Colorado cleaner, better, and safer than most anywhere on the planet because of the
Yeah.
very protective environmental standards and regulations that we have, because of the innovation and technology that our operators have put into the field to reduce emissions here. So if we're not doing it here, we're relying on countries that do not have the same labor standards, environmental standards, human rights standards for our energy, and it's going to cost money to bring it over here, and it's going to pollute when we bring it over here.
Right.
It doesn't make any sense at all.
No, and I mean, it's from an environmental standpoint, you also have to consider that's increasing the risk of having an oil spill in the ocean, because if you're having to ship it overseas, the obviously the chances of having an oil spill or something like that greatly increases. You don't have that issue when you're producing it here and then using it here.
Yeah. The geopolitical risk
Mhm.
increases as well.
Right.
I believe the world is safer when the United States
Mhm.
is producing energy. It's producing its own energy and also
Right.
energy that we can export to friends and allies across the globe who no longer would need to rely on a country like Russia, who
Right.
establishes energy dominance through military dominance.
Yeah.
Let's get our LNG, our liquefied natural gas, to Europe so they don't have to rely on Russia. Let's get
Right.
our natural gas to China, who, by the way, we've asked to build all of our stuff for us because we don't
Mhm.
want to do that in this country anymore
Right.
because of the environmental issues. So now we've asked them to build all of our stuff, and they're building coal plants and burning coal in order to produce our whatever, our iPhones,
Mhm.
all these different things. If they can burn cleaner burning gas from the Rockies, that's better for the environment.
Yep. Yeah, we can't get dependent. I mean, the best example is like how Germany basically got dependent on Russia for oil, and then that's
Yeah.
2017, 2018, and then obviously we know what's happening there.
Germany shut down their nuclear
Yep.
facilities over concerns of the environment, even though I don't advocate for nuclear energy, but it is
Mm.
a clean source of energy.
Right.
So they shut down their nuclear. They relied too heavily on renewables. They couldn't make it work. And so then they ended up using gas from Russia. And then that
Right.
gets cut off when Russia invades Ukraine. Prices skyrocket in Europe. American natural gas saves the continent of Europe in that last winter. And then all of our prices go up because of that supply issue created by Russia, Ukraine. So again, now is not the time. When you've got madmen on the march across the globe, now is not the time to cut off your domestic energy supply.
Absolutely. You mentioned the Colorado legislature, so that's a good segue for kind of the main reason I wanted to bring you on here and to talk about this. So Senate Bill 24-159, the title of the bill is Mod to Energy and Carbon Management Processes, was defeated in the state Senate on March 28th of this year. COGA led the charge against that bill. So just to read a really quick summary, and then I'll kind of let you take the reins here and explain it to the audience. The bill requires the state to phase out issuing new oil and gas permits before January 1st, 2030, and prevents new permits for oil and gas after that date. It also modifies rules for mitigating adverse environmental impacts from oil and gas operations. And then it looks like permits that were in existence would have had to start by 2032, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so Senate Bill 159, can you kind of summarize for the audience? I mean, I kind of just did, but kind of give your take on what it would actually do to the oil and gas industry. Yeah.
It was a very simple bill. It was, as one of my colleagues said, a few lawmakers beginning to say the quiet part out loud. This was the first time you really saw an outright ban on our industry in the legislature. Otherwise, you see all these other rules that try to tie up industry, bind us up in red tape, hoping we'll just go away. This said, you're going to go away. We're going to phase out permits. You won't get a permit after 2029, and then no new drilling after 2032. So if that was the case, you would see oil and natural gas, and their arguments were a couple. One, the first thing they told us was they were worried about mass extinction, which is why they had to do this. Second was wells that have been drilled prior to 2032 would continue to produce. So we'd have all the energy that we needed. And three, we're just giving away a lot of this anyway. It's all going out of state. We have everything that we need. Why are we doing this? And so you can knock down those arguments any way that you would like. They're all ridiculous on their face. If you stop drilling in Colorado, within a few years, you will not have the energy that you need to survive in this state. We would need to import that energy from other states or other countries. Very difficult to build a pipeline into Colorado to get that energy here, by the way. And then this idea that we're producing too much, we should be producing and getting this resource out to other states and other countries that need to use this cleaner burning gas from the Rockies to power their worlds. That is a good thing. This is how the world works. We shouldn't just be trying to, hold all of this here. There are places that don't have oil and natural gas. They don't have those natural resources under their feet. They need it. That's how the world works. So this was a ban on industry under the guise of we need to do something about climate change and we can't keep drilling forever, was what one of the other sponsors kept saying over and over and over again. The bill was defeated in its very first committee, Senate Agriculture and Natural Resources. I think it was very important that it died early and that the legislature sent a message that we're not doing this. We're not banning this industry in Colorado. If we want to have conversations about how we can do it better, cleaner, those are conversations we can have when we are up to the task, and we will come to the table and have those conversations, but we're not going to ban it in this industry. The two Democrats that voted against it, which again, you needed one in that committee, but two stood up and said no. One of them, Senator Dylan Roberts, is from the Western Slope and coal country, and he has seen what's happened when you close down coal and there are no jobs for people to be retrained for. This bill also talked about retraining workers. And my question was, to do what? What industries are clamoring to come into Colorado? Every time I look, our economic competitiveness rankings are dropping the last several years. One of the biggest concerns, the Colorado Chamber did a survey of business leaders in Colorado, and their biggest concern was regulations and over-regulation in Colorado. The person who did the survey said they've never seen that number that high in any other state. Most states, the business leaders are worried about a labor shortage. Here it's the regulations. So what industry is clamoring to get into the state so we can retrain more than 100,000 oil and gas workers and pay them these good paying jobs? It's ridiculous. The other piece of that is we are doing it cleaner, better, and safer here. The governor's office issued a greenhouse gas roadmap 2.0. It's their plans for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. In that roadmap, toward the very back, they mention we meaning the governor's office and the administration, is not in favor of a ban on oil and gas because they understand the environmental impact as we bring in additional resources from other states or other countries. So again, this was just a bad bill that would have put, according to one study, 181,000 people out of work over the next 10 years, would have cost billions of dollars in economic damage to our state. And again, we still need this resource. The federal government projects through 2050 showing an increased use of natural gas globally by 2050. The percentage is a little smaller because it shows renewables being added to the mix through 2050, but we're still going to need it. We're going to need more natural gas than we have today. The world needs more energy, not less energy. We're going to add 3 billion people to the planet by the year 2050. Those people have a human right, I believe, to clean, affordable, reliable, accessible energy. All of these developing nations deserve the same right to energy that we have had for the last 100, 150 years that has created our society of wealth and abundance and wonderfulness. You know, we're all so used to complaining about everything in the world today, and we never stop to realize how wonderful it is to live in the 21st century. All the amenities we have, the fact that we, can cure illnesses quicker, all these different things. And a lot of that has been because of the advancements in energy and oil and natural gas and the byproducts that they bring. When the pandemic was happening and you saw, businesses are shutting down, wait a second, let's go outside and put up plastic sheeting and propane to heat all these different ways that made it possible for us to survive. The vaccine came out and it required millions of plastic vials and things that you give your shots in. It required cold storage to be transported across the country. All these ways that you saw oil and natural gas is just an integral part of our life, and it's going to continue to be. So we can talk about energy transitions, but I think it's important to note that we don't really transition from any energy, and we really have never transitioned from energy. We used to use a lot of whale oil. We don't use that anymore. But other than that, we just add more and better energy to the mix. The country of England has imported wood from the United States to burn for power.
Right.
I mean, in the last few years, right?
Yeah.
There's no energy transition if you're importing wood to burn for power in a country like England. Let's just have, reality-based conversations about what's happening. I'm not opposed to renewables. I think there's a time and a place for that. I think we need all sources, right? Because we need energy. It's how we thrive and survive in the 21st century.
Yeah, that's an important point that I don't hear people making the argument enough is developing nations. Why should a developing nation, a third world country, even be deprived of cheap energy? I mean, it's what we needed as a country to get started. It's what every country that you consider first world needed to get started was cheap energy. And so, it's not realistic to think that some third world country should be using solar panels or something. I can't even afford solar panels.
Right. There are people who articulate this much better than me. Chris Wright from Liberty Energy being one of them. And there's 1 billion people on the planet that don't have access to electricity. Their lives start when the sun comes up. They shut down when the sun goes down. Their economy is shut down when the sun goes down. Many of them burn wood and dung inside their homes to cook their food. And you have horrible indoor air pollution issues, lung issues. They die earlier deaths, etc. Then you have another 1 billion or 2 billion people that have access to intermittent electricity. Their electricity shuts off throughout the day or days on end, making it very difficult to run hospitals, making it very difficult to have incubators for newborn babies that need to be in incubators. And so all these things, we're in a very privileged spot to be having these discussions about what type of energy we want and to look down at other people and say, you don't need to do that. It causes too much pollution. Why don't you just stay with your hospital shutting down for 3 days a week because you don't have the energy for it. I mean, who are we to say this? It's very, very frustrating. So to me, the answer is, how do you do it better so you don't have impacts on the environment, so you don't have impacts on the climate? How do you provide, natural gas and using that as a source instead of burning wood, burning dung? I mean, there are answers here, but some people just don't want to hear it because they're so stuck in this idea that oil and gas need to go away. And they're not being honest with people about how the world works. And so I think a lot of people out there are like, well, yeah, of course we're going to transition to renewables and it's going to be soon, right? And that's what we want. It's not possible right now to do that. And it's probably not going to be feasible in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years beyond.
Exactly. Dan, I want to be conscious of your time here. So I'm going to move on to the next legislative issue that I'd seen. So on Tuesday of this week, and we're recording this on April 11th, the House Finance Committee passed House Bill 24-1367. This bill repeals a severance tax exemption for small, low-producing oil and gas wells, commonly known as stripper wells, beginning with the 2025 tax year. Can you explain to the audience what a stripper well is and the impact this will have?
Sure. A stripper well, excuse me. A stripper well is a low producing well. Right now, the definition is 15 barrels a day or 90 MCF, which is how you measure gas. So these are wells that are considered low producing, and the state in the last couple of years has really, they view these low producing wells as a problem. And we have just kind of a fundamental difference when we talk with the state about this, because they're not a problem. And they're a viable business option for some people to have these low producing wells, because they produce just enough to make, that a viable business. And that ought to be okay in Colorado. The problem we're having now on this tax issue is there are some people who either don't understand the tax system in Colorado or just trying to punish oil and gas by raising taxes on certain operators. Right now, and this system was devised in the 1970s, it's kind of complicated, but we pay our taxes first to the local governments in this ad valorem tax. And then when we pay a severance tax, we get a rebate on that severance tax that we pay to the state, because we've already paid the tax once to the local government. So it's not a loophole. It's not an exemption. It is, so we're not being taxed twice for the same product, because we pay the local governments first. That was a system that was set up in the 70s because they wanted to provide the dollars where they perceived the impacts to be. And so sometimes the state will receive less money in severance taxes. I don't have the actual breakdown of that $2 billion, but a large share of it goes to local governments. And I think there are some people in the state that would rather see more of it go to the state, and that's their issue. So they act as if there's some sort of loophole where we're not paying taxes. We pay a tremendous amount of taxes in this state. The first bite of the apple goes to those local governments. And so again, we hopped on a call with the sponsors of this bill before it was introduced, and they were all over the board. They said it was about climate change. They said it was about emissions. They said we were not paying our fair share. They said it was about, we need more severance taxes from you. And we were like, well, what is it? What are you trying to solve for? Again, these are the types of things we will come to the table. What are you trying to solve for? Let's have a conversation about it. But this notion that we're not paying our fair share of taxes is absolutely ridiculous. Again, I'll go back to the fact that you just balanced your budget on the taxes that we provided to the state. And so I would say, do not harm small business. Do not further tax small businesses. Again, if you're trying to create more of something, then you don't want to create taxes on it. But if you're trying to harm an industry, you raise taxes on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can't imagine a politician just wanting more money to spend. So they're trying to raise your taxes.
Strange, huh? And just to put it into a giant black hole at the state government.
I mean, I think the budget this year is 40.9 billion or something like that. And it was,
I believe, I have not seen this. I imagine it is the largest budget in the history of Colorado. Last year was the largest budget in the history of Colorado. That's the trend.
Yeah, and just I think in 2019 it was only 29 billion, I believe, and now it's over 40 billion just since 2019. So I don't think it's a tax revenue problem. I think maybe prioritization might be a problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, two more questions for you, Dan, and then we'll let you get out of here. So are there any other legislative bills or bureaucratic regulations this year that are targeting oil and gas that maybe the audience should be aware of?
There were initially about a dozen bills, probably still about a dozen bills out there targeting the oil and gas industry. Yeah, an awful lot. There are three others that rise straight to the top. 159 was the number one bill that needed to be defeated, and it was. The next one is Senate Bill 165 by the same sponsor, Senator Kevin Priola. It is a ban on drilling in the summertime in Colorado, along with several other issues that are concerning. But the summertime drilling ban is just a non-starter, especially when you consider there are times in the fall when we can't drill because of wildlife stipulations. So now you're now banning industry for 5 or 6 months. 165 is that particular bill. 166 increases fines and penalties on industries, not just oil and gas, Evraz, that steel mill, Suncor, up to 17,000% higher So minimum fines could go from $300 a day to $52,000 a day. Again, this is a punishment. This is a punitive bill. It's not about cleaning the air or doing anything positive for the environment. Another bill, House Bill 1330, is a bill that looks at air permitting. And as written right now, it just ties up our industry on bureaucratic red tape. It already takes about 2 years to get an air permit in Colorado. So anything that makes that issue more difficult borders on a ban. It doesn't say it's a ban, but if you can't get an air permit in 3 years, 4 years, why, you're not going to operate here in Colorado. So those are the most concerning of those bills, that tax bill being another one. There was another pipeline bill that's being worked on that we saw that was very concerning. So again, these are in many cases activist lawmakers who are being led by extreme environmental groups. They will have a stakeholder call. They'll say, we're going to talk about our bill. We'll hop on the call. In previous years, you would talk with the lawmaker and they would say, this is what I want to do. What do you think? What are the implications? And we would say, well, if you do that, these 3 things will happen. And they could still do it. That's their right. They get 5 bills. They were elected. They can run those bills. Now we hop on the call, and instead of them telling us about the bill, they turn it over to Earth Justice or a different environmental group and ask them to. I will politely ask, I would love for your opinion on this bill and what you think will happen to the oil and gas industry if it passes. And they'll say, well, I'd rather have so-and-so from this environmental group respond and tell you. They don't even realize what's in their bills. They're being written by other people and they're just running them. And so that's kind of the issues we're facing at the State House right now. It's very frustrating. I don't think Coloradans have a good sense of how government operates and what's happening at the State House and how much it's changed just in a few short years from where you really did have pretty authentic stakeholder engagement with, and you still do. There are some bills that have been properly stakeholdered and you do have good conversations with Democrats and Republicans, but there are others. This term fake holdering has started to be, mentioned more and more around the Capitol. And that's really the case with a lot of these environmental bills.
Fake holdering. That's a new one that I haven't heard, but I like it. I'm going to steal it. I'm going to use it.
Yeah, no, I didn't come up with it. I didn't trademark it.
It's a good one.
But it's what's happening, and it's really disingenuous and really unfortunate because this has always been a state. I'm a lifelong Coloradan, lived in Wyoming for a little while, but this is my home. I'm a Colorado native. And this used to be a state where we could have conversations. Governor Hickenlooper used to call it the Colorado way, right? Where you get to the table and you sit down and you don't always walk away happy, but at least you felt like you were heard and maybe you were able to influence the conversation a little bit and you get to a spot that's more workable. And a lot of that doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Well, I think that maybe actually answers my last question, because my last question is, what are the future challenges to the oil and gas industry in Colorado? Unless you have something else, it sounds to me like the legislature right now is the future challenge.
It's the legislature and the regulatory world. And what we need to have happen is allow the regulations that have already been approved in recent years and that are still being worked on. We still have a lot of rulemakings that are in process. Allow those to go into effect. Monitor those, measure those. Are they working? Are they achieving your outcomes? If they're not, then let's come back to the table and have that conversation. Do not continue to haphazardly add new ones onto it when we don't even know if these existing rules and that are being put into play now work. Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice. It's like every single session, they're just stacking new rules on top of you. They haven't even taken effect yet. A lot of times the bureaucracies don't even know how to implement them properly. So they're constantly working. And then you guys have teams of people in the industry who are trying to figure out how they're going to comply with it. And then by the time you're finally getting a grasp on it, it's the next session and they're stacking a whole bunch more rules on you. And they're repeating rules that we've already done, that laws have already passed. And I don't even think they realize that we've already done it. And it's just nonsense.
Yeah. And in the end, it all just costs Coloradans more in the end. Yep, exactly. That's all it does. Yep. Dan, well, thank you so much for joining us. For the audience, we hoped you learned something. Dan, you've been a great voice for the oil and gas industry and being able to deliver it in a way that helps people understand it. Because if you don't work in that industry, all you know about oil and gas is I open my electric bill, I go to the fuel pump, and that's your experience with oil and gas. So we really appreciate you joining us. If people want to find out more about COGA, they can Google COGA or Colorado Oil and Gas Association?
I would encourage them to go to COGA.org.
COGA.org.
We have a lot of fact sheets there that are all sourced, factual information about oil and gas, and then also COGA.org/take action. And that's how they can make sure that their voices are heard at the legislature and with our elected leaders who can they can let those elected leaders know this is an important industry that we value and want to keep in this state.
Excellent. Well, we'll make sure we post your website in the show notes to make it easy for the audience. They can just click and go straight to it. Dan,
Fantastic.
Until next time, we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Engage the Rockies podcast, your go-to podcast for local and state issues concerning Colorado.